Are you tired of having too much stuff? Do you want to get rid of all your worldly possessions but are too lazy to sell them? Then call me, Johnny Danforth, and I'll come and burgle your ass. I'm a trained burglar with over 20 years experience, and for the low price of just $29.99, I'll apply my experience to your home. Say goodbye to mess and clutter, say hello to a brand new space free of everything. Johnny Danforth Burglary Service, decluttering your life by force.
Thank you to Johnny Danforth Burglary Service for being today's fake sponsor. I haven't used him myself because he doesn't exist. This segment is pointless, but I do it anyway because I have fun and there is nothing you can do to stop me. And now, onto the show. Paul M. Bradley? Surely not. But Paul, you fiend, you ne'er-do-well, you vagabond, you charmingly handsome rogue, where have you been? Yeah, it has been a while since my last podcast, for which I can only apologise. I did have a series of guests lined up, but for one reason or another, they were unable to make it. And after a while, I kind of lost motivation to do this, and then I ended up forgetting because I had work commitments, I had sort of COVID-related concerns, I had anxieties, all sorts of things got in the way. But I'm now back, and I'm feeling confident, I'm feeling fresh, I'm feeling funky, and I've got a whole, I'm hoping to have a whole new tidal wave of content barreling towards you at the speed of a gazelle. And that includes today's fantastic talk. So I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know whether I've told this before on this podcast, but around 2 years ago, 2019, I was on a cruise through Asia with my parents. It was the last holiday that we had before the apocalypse came. And, well, I was walking around the ship trying to find something to do. And quite by accident, I found myself stumbling into a lecture held by today's guest, Chris Luard, host of the Such Sweet Thunder meditation podcast, owner of the Such Sweet Thunder website, and author of the Such Sweet Thunder book. He's got his branding right down. I hope that you'll enjoy. Well, I know you'll enjoy. He speaks with such clarity, such calm, that for a while I even confused him for a monk, which you'll hear in this episode. But it does lead to a very interesting part of the discussion. I won't spoil that for now. He's a wonderful teacher, a wonderful spokesperson for meditation, and I think you'll get something out of this. So, without further ado, here it is. My talk with Chris Luard.
It's time.
And what an appropriate way to start a podcast about Buddhism. Chris, hello, welcome. It's wonderful to see you again after so much time. Right, well, I suppose the first, because I met you obviously when I was doing a cruise around Asia back in the before times.
Right.
And I suppose we'll start off with how did you come across Buddhism? How did it become a part of your life?
It was quite some time ago, actually. It was I got introduced to Buddhism about 36 years ago. And so I started practicing when I was very, very young. And I think I can't really recall who the first person was that said, "Oh, you should check this out," or I might have just been browsing through a bookstore. Back then, there were these Barnes and Nobles bookstores in America, these big bookstores, and I used to just kind of walk through them. They were attached to the shopping mall. it might have been that I was just walking through the the Buddhist section or the spiritual section, or I guess back then it would have probably been under the New Age section. Although Buddhism is very old age, but ironically, it used to be found in the 80s and early 90s in the New Age section of the bookstores. And so I must have just come across a book and picked it up and started leafing through it. And I was, I do remember immediately being hooked by it. I was just really drawn in by meditation practice and the teachings of the Buddha very, very quickly. So by the time I was 14, I was meditating every day, and really took a deep dive. By the time I was 18, I was receiving formal training in Zen Buddhism, and very quickly embraced it and became a way of life.
Nice. I find it. I like what you said about it being like, it was put in the New Age folder, because like I suppose nowadays, because mindfulness meditation is very I was gonna say hip, but that's quite an old phrase. I'm meant to be a youngster, but it is quite fashionable in the West nowadays. But I suppose, I mean, how prevalent was it in the 80s? Was it like a real underground thing, or?
It wasn't very prevalent at all. Yeah, it was quite underground. Buddhism started to make its way into the West from Asia around 1960. And so when I got turned on to it, I guess it was early 80s, 1984, 85. It was only 25 years old. And so nobody had really, I mean, there were some people, of course, there were some teachers, and there was a little bit of a movement starting around the early 60s, primarily because China invaded Tibet. So we had a lot of Tibetan refugees coming over into North America and bringing Buddhism with them. And so they were setting up temples and monasteries. So that was kind of how the first kind of wave. And then a few years later, during the Vietnam War, we had a similar thing when that was happening. When the Vietnam War was happening, we had a lot of Vietnamese monks coming over as well and setting up monasteries and temples in North America.
That's quite that's quite ironic, really, because you think about it. It's the country with the with all the old spiritual practices kind of coming over to the countries that are like attacking them to be like, hey, have you tried chilling out? have you tried?
Right. Yeah.
Have you? That's quite
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, it's like a sort of transfer. That was how they got back. That's how they got their own back, by introducing relaxation to the American people.
Yeah, maybe just taking deep breaths would help. Yeah.
So what was it that appealed to you? I mean, I'm trying to, you're a young Chris in a shopping mall, scrolling through the New Age section of the bookshelf. What was it that attracted you to Buddhism? Of all the other like different spiritual practices that would have been on those shelves, what was it about Buddhism that really spoke to you?
That's a really good question. I was 13 at the time. It was probably just that it was exotic and different.
Yeah.
It looked cool. Somebody sitting in the lotus position. Very peaceful, very calm, very tranquil. I thought, oh, that would probably be really good for me. And I had kind of a turbulent childhood, to be honest. So to have something that offered a sort of stability and kind of a way of navigating the challenges that I was encountering at that time in my life became very, very important very quick. So that wasn't evident right away, but after a couple of weeks of meditating, I recognized that this was going to be a real resource. for my life.
As little as
And
as little as a couple of weeks meditation.
yeah, yeah, it was about a couple of weeks where because like I said, I kind of really went into it every day, pretty much right away. And so after a couple of weeks or maybe a month, I really recognized that I was just feeling some profound benefits from it, and really wanted to uh, I knew then that that would be a pretty good resource for my survival, really, through the rest of my teenage years and for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So what sort of experiences were you having with meditation? I mean, what was it that sort of clocked you into realizing this is important?
Yeah, great question. So the practices that I was doing was basically mindfulness. It's what people would now know as mindfulness, and it was given as under that title when I first came across it as well. Um, but it really hadn't become the movement that it is now. And so I was just really, recognizing the body, being in the body, bringing awareness to the sensations of the body. And in doing that, one is allowed to kind of step away from the thinking, from the thoughts in the head. And it very quickly became evident to me that all of my stress was thinking related. And so being able to step away from that and just to find this state of rest in the body, because the body, when you're in the body, you're not really thinking anymore, because you're just in the somatic experience, you're in the sensations of the body, and so there's no thought required in that state. So it's a way of allowing one to step out of the stressful, turbulent thinking and to really find a state of rest. And and still to this day, I find that very, very important to be able to do.
Yeah, because I know what you mean. It's very when I was I mean I came across Buddhism much later, meditation much later. I find, yeah, it's a very, because the mind is kind of it's more of it's a problem solving thing, but if you have no
Mm-hmm.
problems, then essentially it's just trying to it starts making problems because it's, doesn't want to be redundant. You mentioned a word there I've not heard before, the somatic experience. What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean?
It's really a term that's kind of pointing at the felt experience of the body. So when we're using mindfulness or other meditation techniques, going into the body and just really finding a place to rest in the body, so free from thinking, more or less. I mean, there's still always going to be thoughts. The mind always wants to think, but the thoughts aren't required to have a somatic experience. So one can really just recognize, okay, right now my feet feel rather cool, and my legs are resting and warm, and the my body feels really supported and held by the chair right now, and the clothing feels really comfortable on my skin. And so really just going through the body very systematically. And even though there I'm using description, I'm using words to convey the somatic experience, but the somatic experience arises before the words, or without the words, like that.
It sounds almost analogous to the kind of flow state that a lot of like people experience. I mean, I know my dad, for instance, he likes doing like garden work, and so when he's you know doing some sawing or some like drilling and that, like he's just there doing the
Mm-hmm.
sawing, and it's everything else. And I personally, as an actor and a writer, when I'm in that kind of like that sort of state, so it's like, yeah, it's that kind of like moving with things, but in a state of like when you're even when you're not doing an activity, you can still be in that kind of presentness. That,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, right. Now there was something I've written down here. Yeah. So you discovered these meditation practices within weeks. You were sort of having moments of like, this is like, I'm gonna be all right. This is, I can. So as you developed, because I suppose there is a difference between just sort of practicing meditation and then becoming a monk. So how did that develop?
Well, I just want to preface that question. It's a great question, by the way, but I do want to preface it that with saying that I'm not a monk now. I did kind of venture into that life just very, very briefly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I saw you. I saw you in the robes on the ship, and I was like,
Yeah, no, I'm a layperson now, and I spent some time in a Zen monastery in New York, several months, and toyed around with the idea of actually becoming a monk, but didn't go that far into it. And that's a whole nother story. Perhaps we can talk about that later if you wish.
I'm open for that. Yeah.
Okay. But so yeah, I was very happy being. I was a jazz musician. That was my career for many years. And so I went to college to study music. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. And I was already, meditating very, very intensely at that time, and reading a lot about Buddhism. I was very intrigued. And there happened to be the Cambridge Zen Center was about a 20-minute walk from the college, and they had an open seating on Thursday evenings. And so me and a couple of friends from the college would walk down there on Thursdays and go sit, and there was a monk and a nun that we could have chats with and things like that, and talk about Buddhism. And so that was quite nice. I was, very, engaged in my studies in college with music, and also practicing Buddhism at the Cambridge Zen Center. It was a Korean Zen there. That seemed like a good blend. I was actually doing quite well in music and was performing quite a bit, and I actually lucky enough to be able to support myself through music, which was great. As many jazz musicians tend to do, I followed their lead and moved to New York City in 2000. I was going to make a go at being a jazz musician living in Manhattan, but actually I was living in Brooklyn, close enough. And very quickly, right after I moved down there, I found the Fire Lotus Zen Center, which is in Brooklyn. It's a beautiful temple there. And they practice and teach Soto and Rinzai Zen, both Japanese lineages of Zen Buddhism. So I was right at home there. I really, really enjoyed the teachings there and the teachers. I had a really good connection with the head Roshi there. And all was well until September 11th, 2001.
Yep, that'll do it.
And, yeah, that was, really the switch for me. It was like somebody flipped a light switch, and I was like, wow, things are going to be different. Now, it wasn't like I woke up on September 12th and said, okay, I'm giving up music and I'm going to become a monk, Yeah. But it took probably about a year and a half to really digest that experience of September 11th, and really the weeks and months following September 11th, the whole recovery period, and being in New York during those months, and really year and a half after, was really quite profound for me. And so I came around to deciding that if I could engage in these teachings as deeply as possible, with the intention of eventually teaching them to others, that would be my contribution to making sure events like September 11th could never happen. And so that was really and still remains to be the inspiration behind my studies, my teaching, my reason for doing what I do. Yeah.
I suppose, yeah, I've got there's 2 points now I want to make simultaneously, and each one's going to split the podcast into a different direction.
Well,
we're literally dealing with a
we can try to circle back.
we're dealing with a parallel universe situation here, but I'll say the one that would most obviously dovetail. So yeah, I suppose really, how would the state of the world, now or back then, or just, how would it look under a Buddhist eye? So like, what's going on, Chris? That's my question. What's going on?
How do we solve the world's problems? Well, it's a great question, and it's actually we actually use that question. It's interesting that you asked that, because we use that question as a meditation device.
Oh.
In the practices of loving kindness, of compassion, of joy and equanimity, which are known as the Brahma Viharas in the Buddhist tradition, we try to visualize and imagine what the world would look like if everybody was filled with loving kindness, or if everybody was filled with compassion, or if everybody was filled with joy and equanimity and so forth. So it is something that I've spent quite a bit of time contemplating. So what would the world look like? It'd be a lot different, probably. Yeah. Did you?
I was going to say, yeah. So what would you? You say that if people knew this kind of practice, September 11th, like, would be sort of an impossibility. So yeah. I suppose what I'm asking is, what is it that is in our hearts, if you will, that means that these things are happening? What's the diagnosis according to a Buddhist?
Well, it's really, there's a couple of ways we could approach that question. It's a huge question.
I know. I'm sorry, but
that's okay. I think, part of it is that as human beings, we don't have the capability yet to appreciate that the human life contains both joy and sorrow. That there's equal measure of suffering in our lives and equal measure of pleasure. And when at first glance, someone might say, "Of course, right? Of course, that's true." But then when we encounter our struggle, when we encounter suffering, when we encounter discomfort, we habitually want to push it away. We habitually think that we did something wrong, or that something is wrong with our environment. And we move into kind of a knee-jerk reaction against that experience. And so we're habitually pushing away the discomfort and grasping at comfort, pushing away discomfort and grasping at comfort. And this is kind of leads to what the Buddha called the Four Noble Truths. This was the first teaching he gave 2,500 years ago. And he said life contains suffering. And then he advised people to embrace that. He said the word he used was parinya, which is a Pali word, a Sanskrit word, which means in the round. So to know your suffering in the round. And somebody asked him then, well, what do you mean by suffering? And he said, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what one wants, getting what one doesn't want, being close to those who aren't dear, and being separated from those who are dear. So he gave this huge spectrum of discomfort, right? But when we really look at that, we can clearly see that he was saying, well, this is life, right? We kind of use that in our common language, right? Oh, my favorite team lost a big game. Well, that's life.
That's life.
And so it ranges from this very small, trivial discomforts of life, our favorite restaurant being closed, or having to go spend a weekend with the in-laws or whatever it is, and to the very, very, very serious discomforts of, sickness and death, right? And so it does run that whole gamut. And so that's the task at hand, is to bring people to a place where they can fully embrace life without falling into reactivity.
Right.
And so then the second of those 4 tasks is to see how. Just the first one. I know. And this is why it's a lifetime of practice. Yeah. And so the second part of that, or the second task, is to see how our reactivity arises, is to really become mindful of that. And this is where mindfulness comes in as a practice, is we come to a mindfulness practice, we sit in silence, and then we kind of watch how our mind reacts to that state, to the state of being calm, the state of trying to be in a place where we're not in motion. And then our mind, as you said, is the problem-making machine. So it'll bring up something for us to react to. And so in a practice, we start to be able to watch how that process happens. We start thinking about how, the boss said something rude last week, and our mind goes, that guy, he's a, Phil, right? And then we're in reactivity. But see, the whole, the beauty of being able to slow all of that down in a meditation is we can see how that, here it comes, there's that reactive thought, and I can just look at that and let it go. I don't need to get angry. I don't need to get reactive. And so it opens up a whole new way of being in the world.
Yeah.
And so the third, please go ahead.
I suppose actually experiencing suffering, like stubbing your toe, for instance, or as you said, the favorite restaurant closing down. Actually, I had a favorite cafe that closed down due to the pandemic, and it was devastating. I'll never be able to have their cake. They had a really nice cake. I'll never be able to have that again. I am, genuinely really sad about that. But there's that, and then there's like an additional bit which we think is like just the exact same thing, where we then ruminate on it, where we then it's that sort of, as you described it, that sort of that guy is blah 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 blah, and going on like that. That's the optional part.
Right. That's the second arrow.
Yeah.
And
the second. Yeah. The second. I've heard that one. What's that about?
Right. I'll speak to that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure many of the listeners might not know about that. So the Buddha gave this very famous teaching, which is called the parable of the 2 arrows. And so he compared, our life we're consistently encountering getting struck by 2 arrows. And so the first arrow, that we can't do anything about. That's given. That's the first truth, that there is suffering. And, part of the gift of this human body and having a human nervous system and being born on planet Earth guarantees that we're going to experience discomfort. We're going to experience struggle. We're going to suffer, right? And so we can't do anything about that. That's the first arrow. And so then he draws the comparison in the parable. I think the soldier is struck with the first arrow and he falls, but then he gets up and is immediately struck by the second arrow. And so the second arrow is optional, and it's self-inflicted. And so that second self-inflicted arrow is why did that cafe close? That was the best cafe. They had the best cake. I'll never have that cake again. That's such a drag. All of that, as you said, the rumination, the wishing, as one of my favorite teachers likes to say, the argument with the present moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's worse. Yeah. That's worse than the suffering.
Sometimes it can be worse. Yeah. The torment of the rumination can be like hell, and very often. So yeah, the Buddha was very clear about how that, that's the stepping into that second task, is seeing how we inflict that second arrow, That's the reactive process. And then recognizing that we don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
That is optional.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after we've reached that monumentous realization, there is yet another thing that we must do.
There is another thing. And this is the third task. The third task is actually feeling what it feels like when we can let that go. That there's this real joy that arises when we recognize that there is an option, that we don't have to be trapped into our habitual reactive patterns. We don't have to continue making the same mistakes over and over again. And so this opens up a door of freedom. And so the task there's a practice tied into that, is to, when we feel that cessation, when we feel the reactive pattern dissolve without yelling, kicking, punching, screaming, shouting, or without repressing it, that can be equally as dangerous, right? If we kind of choke it back. I'm a spiritual person, I shouldn't feel angry. What will they think of me? That can be equally as poisonous, right? So recognizing that we can do the third choice and just feel the reaction and let it go without responding, then we feel that joy and take it in. He said, the Buddha said, to behold the cessation, to really, really allow oneself to soak in the joy that's there, and just to pause and to say, so good, that's so good. Really take time to breathe it in. There are actually meditation practices that allow that to happen, where you actually breathe it in, allowing it to become a part of your neurological pathways.
Nice.
So that we can more easily allow that to happen. That becomes the new baseline.
Wow.
Eventually.
Yeah, I suppose because I've had experiences now, because I've been meditating for 2 years, which, I mean, I know is peanuts compared to you and all that, but
is awesome.
you have a moment that if I'm going through like real like pain and that, there is a kind of like, because you become aware that this is all just like you change the internal language, if you will. Instead of saying I am depressed or whatever, you say there's a bit of depression in me at the moment, and it's like, I just imagine it's like fuel burning itself out. Like you just like, yeah, do you need any help? Nah, I'm just gonna let it burn. Just gonna let it burn, and you get it. It gets done a lot faster that way, because you're burning through it, and it almost becomes at a certain point where it's like, this is sadness is not the sadness, and that it's not the worst thing in the world. It's the as long as you're not like chatting and all that. I mean, I was having because COVID stress. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but COVID stress COVID stress had built up over time, and one day it just kind of all poured out of me in one fell swoop, and panic. I was having panic attacks, but like at a certain point, I was applying that kind of teaching, and I was feeling it, and it was my heart was going, and all that stuff, and I was feeling the adrenaline flooding through me. But as soon as I'd stopped the internal narration, wasn't the worst thing in the world. I mean, it wasn't pleasant. A panic attack is not a fun thing to have, but it wasn't the most crushing thing, because you're indwelling it with its menace, if you will, and then after a while it just kind of passed.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and that's what you've just described. There is the four truths.
Oh, hooray! I've done it. I've completed Buddhism.
Yeah. And so the idea then is to try to, well, first recognize that's you've worked through that cycle of the four tasks. We haven't talked about the fourth one yet. We can get to that in a moment. And so you've worked through the first three. That you recognize that, okay, this is a moment of struggle. This is a moment of suffering. I'm having a panic attack. Then you were able to see, this is a reaction to the current world crisis. It's natural, it's normal, it's something that everybody is going through right now. And just to recognize that and to see how you're responding physically in your body. And then to that, what you spoke to there is really key, is to let the thoughts subside, to take out that second arrow. And that's why mindfulness is such a powerful practice, is because in mindfulness practice, as you know, we recognize each time we're distracted by thought and we let it go and come back to the present. And so you do the same thing in that situation. You're distracted by those ruminating thoughts, the painful thoughts about the situation. Say, it's just thinking, I don't need to do that right now. Come back to the body and just be with what is. And eventually, you're right, exactly right, it burns itself through and the reaction fades like that. And so the fourth task is to cultivate a way of life where that happens more and more easily, more and more frequently, where that ability is more readily available. And that's just cultivating a meditation practice, or going on a retreat if you wish, or studying some writings, or listening to podcasts. Bringing mindfulness to other aspects of life, like when you're washing the dishes, or washing the car, playing with the cat, whatever it is, bringing mindfulness to your daily routine is another big part of that as well. So, yeah,
you can create a lifestyle, if you will, to use that phrase. You create a lifestyle where you're essentially we're essentially like you're living, if not constantly in the present moment, as much as you can, like, damn well get, because you're a sort of moment to moment interaction with the here and now. And I suppose I find one of the big stereotypes with Buddhism, which a lot of people tend to get when they're not familiar with it, is that Buddhism kind of just is like a zoning out, or I'm gonna just drop out, man. Life's just suffering. We're all. It's portrayed as quite dour, but it's so far from that.
Yes, absolutely right. I've actually had students, prospective students, I suppose, who came to me for meditation lessons, and I remember, one or two in particular that are coming to mind as I'm recalling the story, that was exactly what they said. After the first lesson, they were like, "Oh, I'm to be more present." I was like, "Yeah," and they never came back. That was it. They were looking for a mistake. And, I was like, "Sorry, I can't, go to the bar or something. I can't provide that for you." Meditation as a narcotic, not as a way of embracing the present moment. So,
I suppose, because as meditation's been introduced, actually, this is another thing I wanted to talk about. Because meditation's being introduced far more and more, and I get nervous when it gets introduced in like corporate circles, as like, because I find, as I don't think this like whatever about the economic system, but I find it's always framed as like, so this will make workers more productive if they're like in the present moment more, and that. And I remember hearing philosopher Slavoj Žižek, I believe, who was saying that like Buddhism could be seen as like the cultural model of modern capitalism, that as long as you're present and aware and you know that it's all like bad, that's fine. That's then the perfect excuse to continue on with participating in capitalism, just as long as you're aware, as long as you're like blissed out in that, and as long as you're all, that life is suffering, and that we can all be just present in the moment. And I find I have two thought tracks about this kind of thing. One is, this is blasphemy. This is a horrific mistreatment of Buddhist principles, of spiritual principles, and I'm terrified that it's going to be like the final colonization of even the mind, even the way of escape is going to be colonized. And then secondly, these corporate idiots don't know what they're in for. They're going to unleash some some psychic forces that they have no idea that they're going to do it. They think they're just using it to make workers productive. But then what happens when during the meditation practice they realise that impermanence means that they don't have, means that they prioritise things more than being productive. I just wanted your opinion, your take on this whole sort of.
Yeah, it is an interesting, an interesting turn of events that mindfulness and meditation has been introduced into corporate life. From my perspective, I don't see anything negative in that. If people come to meditation, I think the latter of your 2 points there is much more likely. That in the silence of meditation, people start to realize that if they're acting unethically, that it's very difficult to hold a consistent meditation practice when your mind is saying, I should have done this, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't have done that. That voice is really persistent. And it's why the Buddha taught ethics. It's why he taught the 5 precepts as part of the first training. Don't lie, don't kill, don't steal, don't drink, don't be inappropriate with your sexual energies. And it's because you can't meditate when you're doing those things. And if that can knead its way into the corporate culture, I think only positive can come from that, because if anything, that's the part of the Western culture, well, the world culture, that really needs it. We really need some ethical practices, and I think from my perspective anyway, that I see only good in that.
So the meditation and the ethics are in fact sort of inseparable in a way.
Absolutely. And in the earliest Buddhist teachings, the Buddha said, to be mindful of what's happening internally within ourselves, be mindful of what's happening externally, so with others, and then to be mindful of both, internal and external.
Yeah.
And so right away, right out of the gate, it's referring to not only an internal exploration and a self-help technique, but as a way of bringing a community together and a culture together ethically.
Yeah.
Because
some strange stuff does come up when you meditate. I've been doing it for 2 years, and in that time I had an almost complete philosophical transformation. You start your mind kind of your consciousness expands, if you will. I'm trying not to get too I'm trying to stick to Buddhism and not because I've been exploring Hermeticism and all these other different philosophies. I'm trying to stick to Buddhism because that's the topic of the day. But you do have all kinds of aha moments, self-revelations, bits of you that you'd repressed come bubbling up to the surface. And I suppose that would include, yes, the repressed sort of, oh, I shouldn't have done that bits. So
yeah, absolutely.
So if we could get Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, and all those people meditating, then world peace in 50 years?
I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm down. Let's make some phone calls.
Let's do it. Let's get. He's not up to much nowadays. He's on his golf course. Let's get him on the phone.
Yeah. Somebody send him a copy of Zen and the Art of Golf. Maybe that'll open the door.
That's the way in.
Maybe that'll open the door.
That's the way in. Meditation will help you play golf better. Actually, that's a very good point. Actually, because there are many ways into this. There are many different avenues. Because there's the health benefit, which is probably the one we're leaning on most in the West, because we're still very spiritual ideas make us a little nervous.
Mhm.
even for people who believe in it. And then there's like sort of there's more spiritual aspects, and yeah, different ways of going, different approaches to it.
Yeah, lots of ways in, and but I think they're all valid, all very valid. Yeah.
Right, well, I suppose that's the train done. I'll loop round to yes. So you almost became a monk.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It did, or I did. It was quite some time. I was teaching. How do I make this story short? I was teaching kind
Make
of.
make it as long as you please.
Okay.
This is
So,
an hour. I tried to aim for an hour and a half. If you've got only an hour,
okay.
that's fine. Whatever. Make it as long as you please.
All right. So yeah, I continued being a professional musician for many years. I didn't actually quit playing music until 2016, so that was rather recent. But I was teaching and playing at the same time, kind of, half the year, if you will, teaching meditation, half the year touring as a jazz musician. And I got a job playing music on a cruise ship in 2009. 2009? No, it was earlier than that. 2006 or 7. And then I took a teacher training course in 2009 for meditation. And so I started teaching the crew members on the ship because they were there, and I thought that they needed an alternative to going to the crew bar every night. And I needed to practice my teaching. You know, I was like, this will work nicely. So I started teaching to the crew, and I was on board for 6, 7, 8 months at a time, and so were they. So we got to have a good rapport with many of them. So that was happening for a couple of years, and it started to get uh, leaked, I guess, for lack of a better word, to the head office of the cruise line that I was working on in Miami. People like casino dealers and wait staff were requesting to be on the same ship that I was on, so they could continue studying with me. And so, one thing led to another, and I got an email. Would you like to come out on our ship in Asia to do what you do for the guests? And I was like, yeah, of course, So they said, put some talks together, get a portfolio together, and we'll get you out. And that took another couple of years of doing, but eventually a spot opened up on the Celebrity Millennium, where I think that's where we met. And
Was it
and
2019?
yeah, that was some years after I started, but I started doing that in 2015, and it
Oh.
started with just a few weeks. So I think it was just less than a month my first run. But they must have liked what I was doing because they kept inviting me back and adding more and more time to the contract. So, and one thing led to another. Very soon after that, I wrote my first book and started uh, kind of touring the world teaching rather than playing music. So I was on the ship, teaching Buddhism and meditation. Then when I was off the ship, I would travel around giving talks, promoting the book, facilitating retreats and things like that. Then I played my last gig in 2016, which was great. One of the best decisions of my life. Never looked back. And yeah, I've been really enjoying. So, getting back to the monk thing. So I signed off of a shipper in 2000 and I guess it was 12 or 13, and this was just playing music. And at that time, I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll become a monk. Maybe I'll quit playing and just live in the monastery and see how that goes. And that was kind of the idea. So I flew back to New York, where at the Zen Center that I'd done some training at, went into a residential living community there as a monastic in training to just kind of feel it out. I really only lasted a month in that training, and it was very clear pretty quickly that I wouldn't be happy in that role as a monastic. Um, yeah, there were just too many things that I couldn't be happy doing there.
Such
I
as?
love the teachings, there were, yeah, I knew that question was coming. I was
Yeah, yeah.
trying to dance around it, but that, I'll happily engage it. So since you asked, for me, the emphasis on ritual was really not. I couldn't be happy doing all of the chanting and bowing and the real heavy emphasis on doing all of the rituals exactly precisely the way they ought to be, as according to the
Uh,
head teacher there, um, was really. I found that it was really challenging to be in the present moment with it, and the whole idea behind the teachings is to be in the present moment, right? And so, but to kind of embody a ritual that's been handed down for thousands of years, and that ritual doesn't have any connection to me emotionally.
mm,
You know, I assume that ritual, there was a teacher thousands of years ago, a monk or a nun, who did that behavior, who set up the candles on the altar in a particular way, who poured the water in a particular way, who set the flowers on the altar in a particular way, because it had some meaning to that person, right?
yeah.
And some depth, and it brought some beauty to that person's heart. And then that person had students who said, oh, that's how you do it. And probably it had some meaning to them because the beloved teacher was going through this ritual.
Mm.
So those people had students, and it got passed down to their students. And maybe it had some meaning to their students too, once it was removed. But hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, we're still mimicking those same behaviors
Mm.
that have no relevance to my life at all.
Yeah.
But so much of the training was emphasizing that,
Mm.
you know, and I just couldn't get my head around
I,
it. It drove me crazy.
I can see why. See, I can see what, like, there was probably, like, there is kind of a beauty to the idea that, these practices have been handed down from generation to generation across time and that. But yeah, I mean, I think, it's a religion about impermanence.
Fair point. Very fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
yeah, I can see why that would be, what's the word? I can see why you'd get into your head about that sort of stuff, because the more you think it's got to be just so, the more, yeah, I see it's very, yeah. I did have a point there, but it's gone.
Yeah. No, but what you're speaking to is exactly right. There's one of the just a little story here, and I don't mean to Zen bash or anything like that. Like I said earlier, I really I get there's so much richness in the teachings and the meditations that I learned there.
Mm.
And I really have a profound respect for the Roshi there and the people that I met there and trained with. But I found that in engaging in the rituals of the monastery, that I couldn't help but compare. Like, I was looking at my neighbor. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And so that I found very, very taxing on my practice. And I was also very lucky. I had this career in music at the time, where my work hours were very minimal. And so I was playing music, when I was on the cruise ship, I was playing music maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. And the rest of the time I could meditate. And that was happening for years. And so literally my life is, since 2001 till present, I've meditated anywhere from 5 to 8 hours a day, pretty much every day.
Oh my God!
Yeah. I love it. And interestingly, when I lived in the monastery, my meditation practice was less. And so I felt that I was actually, living the life that I wanted to live, not living in a monastery.
Mm.
And so that was really just the deciding factor. Was that okay? I'm getting more done. I'm writing books. I'm teaching to a much wider audience than I would be able to teach to as a Zen monk. And so I felt that that was how I could best serve these teachings. I could best manifest these teachings in my life
Mm.
was as a lay person rather than a monastic.
Reminds me, I remember you were teaching the life story of the Buddha. The thing that I found most wonderful in those, like, the final words of Siddhartha the Buddha was, I have shown you a way, be a lamp unto yourself, when they were
Yeah.
asking him who should follow. I thought that was so beautiful and so right as well.
Mm.
That it's a constant engagement with the present moment, so it's got to be fluid and individual and that. I mean, again, there's I think in all religions there's a real tension. I say religions, philosophies, ways of life, everything really. There's always a tension between the impulse for tradition and the impulse for novelty, and
Yeah.
I because sometimes you need some traditions to keep things alive, and then other times you want to break the mold, and I find that's a fascinating push-pull sort of relationship, and everyone has to have their own relationship with it.
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's something, one of the teachings that the Buddha gave as well is the middle way, and finding that middle path between, here we're speaking of tradition and novelty, and finding, and you're right, I think it is the task of every practitioner to find where their comfort is, how much tradition they want. I guess you require a little, at least some tradition to consider yourself a Buddhist, right? So
Yeah.
because you are drawing from the teachings of the Buddha, so there is a tradition there, and a tradition of how those teachings are given. But at the same time, we are living 25, 2600 years later, and there are problems, issues, concerns, considerations that we have today that couldn't have even been imagined back in the time of the Buddha.
Mm.
And so, yes, and what you're speaking to is something very, very dear to my heart, is that these teachings, when they're allowed to be fluid, when they're allowed to breathe, and when they're released from the shackles of tradition, they can so beautifully serve the suffering of the present moment, of the 21st century. I mean, it's just there, and I hope that, yeah, I would love to see more and more people make their way to it. And that's, again, we come back to that whole thing of corporate mindfulness and mindfulness in the military now, and it's being used in prisons and prison outreach programs. It's really kind of making its way in a deep way into the culture in many different crevices. And I think that speaks to that. I think it speaks to how at least some parts of Buddhism, when it's stripped away from the ism, is being embraced into the 21st century culture and allowed to move and breathe. Yeah.
Buddhism without the ism. I think I found the title for this episode. That's great.
Great.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, that's and I love the way you describe the teachings almost as if they are living entities, because it's something that I've become very fascinated with, the ideas that ideas themselves are alive, and have context. Actually, this is So I've written down notes here, and I don't even know what that one says. I was writing it without, just while watching you. I was still writing, but yeah, I want to ask. This is going to sound weird. This is going to sound like, are you a spiritual person? As in, like what, like, because I know some people like I know Sam Harris, for instance, practices like Buddhist teachings, but he's like, but there's no gods or anything. There's no spirits behind it. It's just brain chemistry. I want to know, like, do you lean more on that side, or are you more of a spiritualist?
I would put myself right kind of in the middle of there. For me, well, going back to the life of the Buddha, so the Buddha was basically a hedonist. He was a prince, lived in a palace, was spoiled with luxury. It said he never even thought about leaving the palace grounds for his teen years. He was just, in the lap of luxury, never wanted for anything. And then when he left the palace grounds, he came across a person who was suffering with sickness, and another person suffering with aging, another person who was dead, a corpse. And so here, his questions, it was the questions that led him on this path. How do we live a life that can hold suffering and the beauty of life at the same time? And for me, that's spirituality. It's that type of questioning, that inquiry. That is a spiritual quest for me, not whether there's a God or not a God, or life after death or rebirth or all of that. For me, all of that is it's fun to talk about from time to time. Yeah. But it really isn't at the heart of a spiritual quest from my perspective.
Yeah.
The heart of the spiritual quest is, what brings you here? Why are we on the cushion? What are we meditating about? What is at the heart of our quest? And how do we then manifest that in the world? What does that look like when we are interacting with people, when we're going about in the marketplace, interacting, buying and selling, trading, having conversations with people? How do we bring that practice to life? And so for me, all of that is, if that's spiritual, then I'm very spiritual.
I know what you mean. I like that, because I love all kinds of, like, I love, like, weird like beliefs and all the crazy sort of stuff out there. But at the end of the day, that's not what brought me to any of it. And I found a big bar, because I didn't get into spirituality for a while. I was very much with my dad, and thinking it's all just silly. You just you get up and you have a bacon sandwich, and then you get in the grave or whatever. That was a weird analogy, but I found that the thing that really got it was that spirituality isn't a checklist of stuff, that it's not like an additional science. It's not like crystals and that. I mean, I've got one in my pocket right now, but that's beside the point. It's not about whether or not this physically happens, or whether or not the right practices can literally get you in contact with other entities. That's maybe, but at the same time, if that's the bit you're focusing on, then that's really, you're in the wrong game there. You ought to be doing science. You ought to be doing, like, natural sciences and that. What the real crux of it is like the philosophy. It's the what's the point of doing all this? Why, because you can be in contact with all the gods in the world, but if you're still miserable, then what's the point?
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
Absolutely.
Just a new thing? Just another thing to look at and judge yourself by? So I suppose to conclude this fantastic episode, would you mind leading a short meditation for us.
Oh, sure. Okay. You said short. Do you have a kind of a time in mind, or?
I'd say 2 minutes because I don't want
Oh,
too much just dead air. I'd say a nice 2 minute meditation would be wonderful to
sure,
round us out.
sure, sure. Thanks for asking. Yeah, sure. Happy to. So I have my bell here. I'll just ring the bell, and I'll bring us in.
Marvelous.
Yeah. And so the invitation here is to just arrive into the present moment. You might arrive by just noticing how the body feels in this posture, if you're seated or lying down, or could be standing. Just feeling into the body. And perhaps taking a nice, long, nourishing, deep breath, allowing the out breath to be just a little bit slower than the in breath. And then just allowing the breathing to return to its uncontrolled breathing pattern, just breathing normally, naturally. And then turning awareness and attention to the thinking mind. So each time you notice you're distracted by thoughts, you can say the word thinking to yourself. That will help the thoughts to dissolve, and you can gently bring your awareness and attention back to the body, back to feeling the breath, and just rest. And so I'll be quiet here for another minute or so, just allowing us to dance with the thinking mind. Again, if you get distracted by thoughts, just saying thinking to yourself, noting the thinking, letting it go, and celebrating the return back to the present moment. And so in the next few breaths, I'll ring the bell again and cue us back into our conversational space.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. Marvelous. Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope we can have you back again at some point.
Happy to come back. Yeah.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
So, where can we find you? What do you want to plug?
Oh.
All that jazz.
Thank you for asking. Yeah. So I have a website. It is suchsweetthunder.org. Suchsweetthunder.com takes you to a really great Duke Ellington record, and that can be enlightening too if you like swing music. It's actually a great album. But I am suchsweetthunder.org. As far as events and things coming up, I am hosting and facilitating an online meditation retreat program. It's on the topic of equanimity, and which is a great topic. It's beautiful. It's really equanimity is considered to be the pinnacle of mindfulness practice. And so we'll be doing quite a bit of mindfulness in the course. We meet twice a week for 2 hours over Zoom. And if you want to find out more information about that, just go to the website. All the registration and details are there. suchsweetthunder.org again. And if you click on the retreats, the retreats and programs page, that'll have all of the details for that. I also offer meditation sessions one-on-one. They're an hour-long sessions, and if you'd like more information about that, also on the website under the online studies page. And yeah, I think that's all I've got right now.
So, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you very much once again, and I will see you next time, hopefully.
See you next time.
Yeah.
See ya. Thank you.
That was Chris Luard, everyone. What a talk. What a beautiful discussion that was. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to check out more of Chris's teachings on suchsweetthunder.org, not .com, .org. Sign up for his equanimity course, which I believe is happening mid-September, so book up quick. In the meantime, please, if you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe, hit the bell, rate 5 stars, I don't know, give it a little recommendation to your mates, put up plaques in the street advertising it, go on street corners preaching the words, giant billboards preferably, great billboards, stick it up to tell everyone to subscribe. And if you do that, I'll be very surprised, but I'll also say thank you. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Cheerio. I still haven't worked out an outro. Bye.